Hey everyone, this guy's welcome back, and today we're going to be looking at underwater redstone. So yeah, we've got a bunch of circuits which we're going to be looking at which can help you construct redstone underwater without having to, clear out large areas of land or water in this case. And yeah, so let's get started. So here are all the blocks that you can use underwater. We've got redstone blocks, observers, slime blocks, honey blocks, pistons, node blocks which do actually work. Very importantly, lamps, dispensers, water buckets are surprisingly important, droppers, pressure plates which surprisingly do not break underwater, target blocks, and then on the other end of the spectrum we've got some really interesting ones. We've got powered rails, trapdoors, hoppers, not too surprising, stairs, and magma and soul sand, which are actually very interesting in their use underwater for redstone. So let's actually have a look at how we can use these things. So the first thing we need for redstone is a source of power. So here are some of the basic things that you can do. So the first one is just a standard redstone block. You plonk a redstone block down, it activates the circuit. It stays activated until you break it down. The problem with this, you're going to have to go running about with a redstone block, and in case you want to turn something off, you're going to have to break it, which obviously takes time. I'm in creative, so it's fast. But yeah, that's how the redstone block works. Just a continuous signal. The next one is using tridents. Now tridents can be thrown at target blocks and that lets out a pulse. Now that's very, very important because this basically means that a trident can be used as a button if it is activated by the player. And it can also be activated from a very long distance. Alright, next up we're going to be looking at trapdoors and node blocks. So we've got an observer looking into a trapdoor which is powering the lamp, and as you can see, every time I open the trapdoor the lamp sets off because, well, you're basically updating whatever's in front of the observer, and similar for the node block. Now you should remember that in this case you are creating one-tick pulses, and that's very important because it does end up in pistons spitting out the block in a lot of systems. Alright, next up, if we take a bucket and stand in front of an observer and pick up the water, you can actually see that the lamp turns on just once, but the piston extends twice. So that's because basically there's one update for when you remove the water, but then there's a second update when the water flows back. So this is really, really useful in a lot of situations because it is actually activating twice. So over here, what we've got is an observer attached to a sticky piston with a redstone block in the end. Activating the trapdoor, as you can see, it basically acts as an on-off switch. Similarly for the node block, so basically this can be used as a lever. However, if you're using the water bucket trick, it instead acts as a button. As you can see, the lamp remains on in this case. That's because the piston actually spits out the redstone block and then on the second extension pulls it back. So it is switched off for just a very short amount of time. Alright, so next up we're going to be looking at how we can transmit redstone signals. We obviously can't use redstone dust or repeaters underwater. So over here we've got a node block which is being looked on by an observer. The observer powers the power rails. We've got 9 power rails, which is the longest, and then another observer which detects when the power rail has been, you guessed it, powered. So as you can see, the node block pretty fast actually is able to set off the lamp on the other end. Alright, next up, because we don't want powered rails and we want maybe a bit of delay, we're going to be using pistons. Pistons take some time to extend, and yeah, that's what we're using. Over here we've got a line of sticky pistons and redstone blocks. As you can see, set off the node block and basically it spits out the redstone block which extends all the other pistons. Now you might notice that the retraction is a whole lot faster than the extension. That's because pistons do actually retract instantly but take one tick of delay to extend. Alright, so next up, what happens if we wanted to send a signal up top? So once again we've got a similar setup down below for activation, but instead over here we've got soul sand and magma blocks. Now up here we've got 2 observers, and as you can see, the bubble columns created by the soul sand actually run right into the observer. Now if we actually move the magma block in front, the bubble column is generated in front of the observer, and observers can actually detect that, and they force the piston to push out the redstone block, as you can see, turning on the lamp. So the extension does take a bit of time because of the generation of the bubble column, but while retracting, it is pretty instant. It's not instantaneous, it's fast. But the advantage with this is that all the blocks activate at the same time. Alright, next up we're going to be looking at stairs. Now over here, as you can see, the stair on the right changes its shape every time I place a stair over here. And that's what we're going to be using. We're just going to be pushing this stair, forcing the other stair to change its shape and turn on the lamp. This is really useful for redirecting redstone. Alright, next up we're going to be looking at flying machines. Now, flying machines, it's very important that you want your observers pointing downwards, because the observers might detect the flow of water if they're pointing sideways, and that is really not what you want. So as you can see, the flying machine reaches the end. We've got an observer which passes the piston, which passes another observer, a whole set of things. Over here we've actually got some glass blocks because I didn't want the water flowing in there. So it's actually getting updated only once. So you can see what happens to the slime block this time around. You can see that the slime block and the connected block actually move to in front of the observer, which sets it off just in time for it to set back. So yeah, you can attach all kinds of stuff to your flying machine to activate more things. Alright, next up we've got dispensers with arrows. The problem with dispensers with arrows is underwater it's not very long, and more importantly, dispensers are pretty random. So as you can see, this last arrow actually dropped 4 blocks away instead of 3 blocks away. So yeah, it could be a fun way to activate things, but it's not really very reliable. Alright, next up we're going to be looking at pulse extenders. Obviously, so far we've just been looking at how to create one-tick pulses. So now we're just going to be looking at how we can extend it, maybe last a tiny bit longer. So we've got a whole mess of pistons, but as you can see, the lamp actually does stay on for a tiny bit longer. So what's happening here is we've got this piston which pulls the observer back and forth, and every time the observer is moved, it is allowed to power the piston right next to it because there's a solid block here. And that also does the same thing. Every time the observer moves, it is able to power the falling piston. The reason we're using pistons here, as I mentioned, pistons add an extra tick's worth of delay. As you can see, the chain of observers and pistons finally goes on to activate the piston on the right side, which pushes the redstone block back. So the way this works is, if I may demonstrate here, you can see when the observer is extended, it can power the piston. But even when it retracts, because there's a solid block there, it is able to activate the piston. If there was a transparent block there, it would act as a standard flip-flop. Alright, next up we're going to be looking at a few interesting things that you can do without using redstone. We're going to be using a lamp because a lamp has this interesting property that it actually stays on longer than how long it's been powered for. So as you can see, the piston in the end is actually getting powered twice. That is because the observer can actually detect the lamp turning off. However, this doesn't work for note blocks because note blocks are basically just an instant sound. So you can see the piston extends only once. Same thing for a dispenser or a dropper, because it's only being powered temporarily. However, this cannot be used to multiply signals indefinitely. So it doesn't go 1, 2, 4. You're going to have to be slightly smarter if you're using lamps. As you can see, the final one, a bit of delay, but it turns on only once. Alright, so finally we've got a bit of an interesting one using dispensers in water buckets. So the dispenser will activate and remove the water in front and get the bucket will get collected, and the observer will get powered twice because of the water flowing back. So as you can see, it's a very simple way of creating a double pulse in the end. One thing you also want to make sure is never have vertical pistons with redstone. It bud powers it, and bud powering is a bit nasty. So yeah, I'd suggest being careful with that. So anyways guys, thanks for watching. This means guys, and I am Sid Shafana, and shall catch you in the next video.